Have you ever asked yourself why God allowed someone to hurt you so deeply, knowing how much it would break you? It is a question that echoes in the heart long after the wound forms, a question that keeps returning when the silence of God feels louder than the pain itself. You trusted, you loved, you opened your heart with sincerity, and still the blow came. And in that moment, everything inside you whispered, "Why would God let this happen?" But what if the pain was never meant to destroy you? What if it was the only way to reveal a truth you would have never seen, while your heart was attached, hopeful, or blinded by what you wished reality could be? Sometimes God does not stop the hurt, because the hurt becomes the doorway to clarity. Pain removes illusions. Pain exposes character. Pain reveals intentions that words hide and actions disguise. There are people you would have kept forever if God had not allowed the wound to open your eyes. Their presence felt comforting, but their purpose was weakening your spirit. Their affection sounded sincere, but their actions were guiding you away from who you were becoming. And even though you prayed for peace, God allowed disruption, not to break you, but to break the connection that was breaking you. God sees what you cannot. He hears conversations you never knew happened. He sees motives hidden behind smiles and promises. He sees what would have happened if he had not intervened, through the very pain you begged him to prevent. Sometimes the hurt is the rescue. Sometimes the disappointment is the protection. Sometimes the betrayal is the revelation heaven had to allow so you could finally walk in truth rather than illusion. And if your heart still trembles, trying to understand the moment everything fell apart, breathe. You are not abandoned. You are being awakened. This pain is not the end of your story. It is the moment your discernment sharpens, your spirit rises, and your future begins to shift. You may not see it fully, but something inside you knows this hurt is pulling you closer to the person you are becoming. And before we continue, tell me something from your own experience. Have you ever felt God revealing truth through pain in a way you did not expect? Share your heart in the comments, leave a like to support this message, and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next, because what you will discover in the following part may speak directly to what you are living right now. When the truth finally begins to surface through the pain, something shifts inside you, even if you cannot articulate it yet. There is a moment when the shock settles and your spirit begins to process what really happened. It is not just the hurt itself that wounds you, but the realization that God allowed it to unfold exactly the way it did. And this creates a spiritual tension deep within you, because part of you wishes he had stopped it, while another part senses he was revealing something you were not ready to see before. The heart wrestles with this contradiction, but the soul knows that revelation rarely arrives gently. Sometimes it comes through impact, shaking everything so the hidden can no longer remain hidden. This is why certain disappointments feel heavier than others. They do not simply bruise your emotions, they expose a deeper layer of truth that was silently draining your strength. God does not allow this shock to punish you, he allows it to awaken you. You begin to notice the subtle signs you ignored, the uneasy feelings you brushed aside, the inconsistencies you tried to excuse. The pain becomes a lens, clarifying what love had blurred. What once seemed confusion now begins to look like divine messaging, not because God wanted you to suffer, but because he needed you to recognize what was spiritually misaligned. And this recognition is not instant. It unfolds slowly, almost like a spiritual unraveling. You start to realize that the very person who hurt you carried patterns that were never meant to grow roots in your life. Patterns that could have reshaped your identity, weakened your confidence, or redirected your journey away from what God was preparing. The shock of the hurt becomes the beginning of alignment. It is the moment God gently lifts your chin and shows you that the pain was not random. It was allowed to interrupt a cycle you did not even know you were caught in. As this awareness deepens, you begin to see that God's silence during the disappointment was not abandonment but orchestration. He allowed certain actions to be revealed. He allowed certain words to be spoken. He allowed certain behaviors to surface, not because he wanted you wounded, but because he wanted truth undeniable. Had everything remained comfortable, you might have stayed in a place that could never sustain who you are becoming. The shock is painful, but it is also a spiritual turning point, where your discernment becomes sharper, your spirit becomes more alert, and your heart begins to understand that divine protection often arrives disguised as disappointment. And as this revelation becomes more real, you feel something you did not expect, the beginning of release. Not forgiveness yet, not healing yet, but release. A subtle loosening of the emotional ties that once held you so tightly, a slow awakening to the possibility that the hurt was not the end but the beginning of your transformation. As the release begins to settle into your spirit, another layer of truth starts to rise, one that reveals not just what happened, but what God was showing you through the wound. Pain has a way of stripping away illusions that you did not even realize you were holding. It forces you to confront what was beneath the surface, the motives you overlooked, the patterns you normalized, the emotional investments you made without truly seeing the cost. And suddenly, what once felt confusing becomes clearer, almost as if God is illuminating each detail piece by piece, showing you that the revelation itself was a form of protection. There is a moment when the heart finally sees what the mind was trying to deny, a moment when you recognize that the person who hurt you was revealing themselves long before the final wound. Their tone, their inconsistencies, their absence in moments you needed presence, the way you felt drained rather than strengthened after interacting with them. These were indicators of misalignment that your soul felt but your hope tried to silence. The wound did not create the truth, it exposed it. And once the truth is visible, the relationship or situation can no longer occupy the same place in your life. This unveiling is often uncomfortable because it confronts not only the other person's intentions, but your own emotional needs. You begin to see where you held on to someone out of longing rather than discernment, where you interpreted temporary attention as genuine care, or where you excused harmful behavior because you feared losing someone you believed was meant to stay. The revelation becomes a mirror, reflecting not just their actions, but your vulnerabilities, your desire to be valued, your hope for something real. But even this exposure is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. God reveals what wounds you, so he can also reveal what heals you. The truth begins to form a new foundation inside you. You start recognizing the difference between someone who speaks to your emotions and someone who speaks to your spirit. You realize that real alignment does not confuse you, drain you, or make you question your worth. Divine connections feel like clarity, not chaos. They reveal peace, not anxiety. They cultivate growth, not insecurity. And now, through this painful revelation, your spirit becomes trained to discern these differences with a sensitivity you did not have before. As this inner clarity strengthens, you also begin to understand that the wound was not an interruption to your story. It was instruction for your destiny. God allowed you to see the truth so you would stop building on unstable ground, so you would stop pouring into a cup that could never hold what you carried, so you would stop mistaking potential for purpose or attachment for divine alignment. Every hurt, every tear, every moment of confusion becomes part of a bigger unveiling, shaping your inner discernment in ways that will guide you for years to come. And as this revelation deepens, something else begins to shift inside you. A realization that the separation you feared might actually be the very thing leading you toward the next chapter God has been preparing all along. As the revelation settles, and the truth becomes undeniable, a different kind of silence begins to form around you. It is not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of separation, the kind that God allows when He begins pulling you away from what was quietly harming your spirit. This separation does not always come through a dramatic ending. Sometimes it arrives through emotional distance, through conversations that no longer feel the same, through moments where your spirit senses what your heart is still learning to accept. And even though this distance feels painful, it carries a divine purpose. God is removing you from what was never meant to shape your future. There are times in life when God does not simply close a door. He gently pushes you away from one. He lets the connection weaken. He lets the intentions become clearer. He lets the disappointment speak louder than the excuses. And while part of you wants to hold on, another part begins to understand that God is protecting you from battles you were never meant to fight and wounds that would have taken years to heal. It is His mercy in disguise, redirecting your heart before it becomes deeply entangled in something that could have dimmed your spirit. And this withdrawal from God is not punishment. It is alignment. When He removes someone or something from your life, He is not taking from you, He is preserving you. He sees the unseen, the hidden motives, the spiritual consequences, the emotional price you would have paid if the relationship had continued. What you interpret as loss, heaven often defines as rescue. What feels like a painful ending is, in truth, a divine intervention before a deeper wound could reach you. During this separation, you begin to notice the emotional patterns that once felt normal but were actually stealing your peace. The inconsistencies, the confusion, the instability, these were signals your heart attempted to ignore until God amplified them through pain. And now, as clarity grows, you start to see that love should not feel like waiting for someone to change, nor should connection feel like walking on fragile ground. Real alignment strengthens you. It grounds you. It confirms you instead of draining your spirit. But separation is rarely easy. It requires the courage to release what you once prayed for and the strength to believe that God is guiding you even when you feel temporarily empty. Yet deep down, you sense that this distancing is not the end. It is the beginning of something more aligned, something healthier, something God-ordained. It is the sacred moment when God redirects your story, not through force, but through truth revealed in the heart. And as you sit with this realization, I want to invite you into the conversation. Has God ever used separation or silence to reveal truth to you? Share your experience in the comments so others can feel encouraged by your journey. As the separation unfolds and the truth settles into your spirit, something deeper begins to surface. An internal mirror that reflects not only what happened, but what the experience awakened within you. Pain has a way of revealing the inner landscape you did not realize needed healing. It exposes the wounds you learned to function with, the insecurities you tried to hide, and the emotional patterns you carried without noticing how they shaped your choices. When God allows someone to hurt you, He's not only revealing who they truly are, He's also revealing the parts of you that were left unprotected, unhealed, or unacknowledged. This is the moment when you begin to see your own heart with a kind of clarity that comfort could never provide. You start to recognize why certain behaviors affected you so deeply, why certain words pierced you, why the loss felt heavier than you expected. The pain becomes a teacher, pointing you toward the areas where your soul still seeks validation, where your boundaries were too thin, where your hope overshadowed your discernment. And though this realization is uncomfortable, it is also liberating, because God never reveals what He does not intend to heal. The wound becomes a doorway to self-awareness. You start to understand that healing is not just about moving on from someone. It is about moving toward a healthier version of yourself. You begin to notice how much of your identity had been quietly shaped by trying to be enough for someone who did not appreciate your value. And in this awakening, the illusion breaks. You see that love should not require you to shrink, to silence your needs, or to carry more emotional weight than your heart was designed to hold. This inner reflection is sacred because it uncovers truths you were not ready to face before the hurt happened. You realize that part of the pain came from placing expectations on someone who was never equipped to meet them, or from giving pieces of your heart to someone who did not have the capacity to hold them. You recognize how easily affection can disguise incompatibility, how hope can mask reality, and how longing can blur discernment. Through this clarity, God is not condemning you, He is strengthening you. And as this self-understanding grows, something shifts. You begin to see your worth not as something fragile or negotiable, but as something divinely anchored. The truth teaches you that your value was never determined by how someone treated you, nor diminished by their inability to cherish your heart. It becomes clear that the hurt was not a reflection of who you are, but a reflection of what they were unable to carry. This internal awakening marks the beginning of restoration. With each revelation, the emotional ties loosen, the confusion fades, and the foundation of your heart becomes stronger. You start to recognize that this season is not just about letting go of someone. It is about recovering yourself, understanding your own depth, and rising into a clarity that will shape every decision moving forward. And as these realizations continue to unfold, a new understanding begins to surface, that the rupture, painful as it was, carries a divine purpose far greater than you imagined. As the inner awakening deepens, you begin to see that the rupture itself carries a purpose far beyond the pain it caused. There are moments in life when God allows something to break because leaving it intact would have broken you instead. What felt like emotional collapse was, in reality, a divine redirection. It was God stepping into your story, not to take something from you, but to reroute you toward what would have fulfilled you in ways the former connection never could. And even though the loss felt devastating, your spirit now begins to sense that it was necessary, an interruption that prevented a far greater wound. Purpose often hides behind pain. You rarely see it in the moment because the heart is still trying to make sense of what it lost. But as days pass and clarity grows, you begin noticing how different your life feels without the weight you once carried. You start to see how much energy you were pouring into trying to maintain a connection that was never aligned with your calling. You realize that the emotional exhaustion you normalized was actually God whispering that this path was not meant for you. Sometimes the blessing is not what God gives, but what He removes before it destroys your peace. This redirection becomes even clearer when you think about how much of yourself you had surrendered just to keep the relationship or connection alive. You compromised pieces of your identity, softened your voice, or ignored your intuition because you believed the bond was worth preserving. But now, through the rupture, God shows you that anything requiring you to diminish who you are is never aligned with His purpose for your life. Your calling requires strength, clarity, and spiritual stability, things that misaligned relationships quietly erode over time. And so, the pain becomes a turning point. It reveals where you were settling out of fear, where you were choosing familiar patterns instead of divine direction, where you were accepting emotional crumbs while praying for a feast. God allowed the break not to punish you, but to protect the destiny He placed inside you. There are battles you were not meant to fight, burdens you were not meant to carry, futures you were not meant to build with people who could not walk with you into what He is preparing. The rupture was not a destruction, it was an extraction. But perhaps the most profound realization comes when you begin to see how the pain is reshaping your future choices. You start to desire connections that honor your spirit, not just your emotions. You become more discerning, more grounded, more aware of what genuine love and alignment should feel like. The rupture becomes a filter, removing what was never meant to stay and clearing space for what God has been waiting to send. What once felt like a devastating ending now begins to look more like the doorway to a chapter built on clarity, wholeness, and divine intention. And as you step into this new understanding, you begin to sense that the wound was not the final word. Something sacred is being rebuilt within you, something stronger, wiser, and more aligned with the person God is shaping you to become. As this new understanding takes root, another powerful truth begins to rise within you. Liberation often begins at the very moment you believed everything was falling apart. What you thought was the breaking point was actually the breakthrough. The hurt that once felt unbearable becomes the very force that loosens the chains you could not see while you were emotionally attached. Liberation does not always arrive with celebration or clarity. Sometimes it arrives disguised as loss, discomfort, or endings you did not choose. But now, standing on the other side of what wounded you, you can feel the quiet shift happening inside your spirit. There is a sense of lightness returning, even if slowly. You start to breathe differently, think differently, move differently. The heaviness that once sat on your chest begins to lift, not because everything is perfect now, but because the emotional weight you carried was never meant for you. It becomes clearer that God allowed the wound not to weaken you, but to free you from cycles that had quietly held you captive. Cycles of doubt, cycles of waiting for someone to treat you right, cycles of giving more than you received, cycles of hoping someone would finally see your worth. And this liberation is not just emotional, it is spiritual. Something within you is being released from attachments that were draining your purpose. God does not simply remove people. He removes what was limiting your growth, clouding your discernment, or leading you into versions of yourself that were too small for the destiny He designed for you. Through this process, your faith becomes sharper, your intuition more precise, your boundaries more defined. You begin to stand in your identity with a confidence you did not have before, because you now understand what happens when you ignore the signs and what happens when you trust them. This freedom also brings a deeper level of clarity. You begin to recognize what true connection feels like and what it does not. You learn to distinguish between love that nurtures and love that confuses, between presence that stabilizes and presence that destabilizes. You understand now that emotional intensity is not the same as spiritual alignment. And perhaps most importantly, you realize that letting go was not failure. It was obedience to the truth God revealed to your heart. As liberation unfolds, you become more aware of how much God has been guiding you, even when you felt abandoned. You see that the pain was part of the preparation, clearing space for growth, healing, and future blessings that require a stronger version of you. The wound becomes a symbol not of defeat, but of transformation, a marker of the moment your story began to shift into a higher chapter designed by God Himself. And now that you are walking in this newfound clarity, I want to hear from you. Has God ever freed you from a cycle or relationship through pain or unexpected endings? Share your experience in the comments so others can find strength in your testimony. As liberation settles into your spirit, a new chapter begins quietly forming inside you, one shaped not by what you lost, but by what you are becoming. This stage is where God starts rebuilding you from the inside out, piece by piece, truth by truth. The pain revealed what was misaligned, the separation removed what drained you, the rupture redirected your path, and now reconstruction begins. It is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a soft shift in the way you think, the way you see yourself, the way you understand what you deserve. Yet these small shifts mark the beginning of a profound transformation. You start noticing how differently you respond to things that once overwhelmed you. The emotional patterns that used to pull you into confusion no longer hold the same power. You begin setting boundaries without feeling guilty, choosing peace without feeling selfish, and protecting your heart without feeling cold. This is not hardness, it is healing. It is the maturity that comes after surviving what should have broken you but instead awakened you. The wound no longer defines you, it refines you. And that refinement becomes the foundation for everything God is preparing ahead. There is also a deepening of your identity during this phase. You begin rediscovering parts of yourself that were neglected while you were emotionally invested in someone who could not see your value. Dreams you silenced start resurfacing. Strengths you forgot you had begin reappearing. Your relationship with God becomes richer, more grounded, more personal, because you now understand His protection in ways you never did before. You start to trust not only His guidance, but also your own discernment, which has been sharpened through the fire. This reconstruction is not just emotional, it is spiritual alignment. God is restoring the clarity that was blurred by emotional attachment. He is rebuilding your confidence in a way that is no longer dependent on someone else's appreciation. He is teaching you that the right connection will never require you to prove your worth, dilute your spirit, or sacrifice your peace. Instead, it will amplify your purpose, strengthen your identity, and confirm what God has already spoken over your life. As you rebuild, you notice something powerful. You are no longer drawn to what hurt you. The attraction to chaos fades. The tolerance for confusion dissolves. The desire to return to what once felt familiar disappears. You start craving stability, honesty, alignment, and emotional safety. This change is not accidental. It is evidence of healing. It is God rewiring your heart so you no longer choose from wounds, but from wisdom. What once tempted you now feels too small for who you are becoming. This reconstruction phase prepares you for something greater, something more aligned with your calling and your future. You begin to feel a quiet anticipation, a sense that God is positioning you for relationships and decisions that match your healed identity rather than your former brokenness. The past no longer holds the same power because you are no longer the same person who walked into it, and as this new strength rises within you, a deeper transformation begins to unfold, one that leads you toward the life God intended all along. As this inner reconstruction strengthens, you begin to realize that God is not simply healing your past, He is repositioning your future. There is a quiet but undeniable shift happening within your spirit, a sense that you are being prepared for something more aligned, more intentional, more connected to who you truly are. The pain revealed truth, the truth created clarity, and now clarity becomes direction. You start to see how every experience, even the one that hurt you the most, is guiding you toward a chapter built on discernment instead of desperation, wisdom instead of longing, and divine alignment instead of emotional compromise. This repositioning often begins internally before it manifests externally. You feel your desires changing, your standards rising, your expectations sharpening. Where you once tolerated inconsistency, you now recognize it as a warning sign. Where you once accepted emotional confusion as part of love, you now understand that real connection brings stability, not chaos. God has refined your perception, teaching you to differentiate between what appeals to your emotions and what aligns with your spirit. And this shift affects every decision you make moving forward. You begin to notice that your heart responds differently to people and situations. You no longer feel drawn to relationships that drain you or environments that silence your growth. Instead, you feel pulled towards spaces where your voice is valued, your presence is honored, and your purpose is supported. You recognize that what once felt like love was sometimes attachment, and what once felt like connection was often comfort mixed with fear of letting go. But now, through this transformation, your choices are shaped by clarity, not confusion. You no longer build your life around what you hope someone will become. You build it around who God is shaping you to be. This repositioning also unveils the intentional timing of God. You begin to see why certain doors had to close, why certain people had to leave, why certain prayers were answered with silence or redirection. What felt like divine delay was often divine protection. What felt like loss was repositioning. What felt like abandonment was preparation. You may not have understood it in the moment, but now you see that God was moving you away from what would have limited your future and toward what will cultivate your purpose. And as your spirit aligns with this new direction, you start to recognize that God is preparing relationships that reflect your healed identity. People who value honesty, commitment, emotional integrity, and spiritual depth. People who are capable of walking beside you, not pulling you backward. People who see you clearly and cherish you without conditions. These connections are not built on illusions or inconsistency. They are built on purpose, truth, and mutual growth. And now, because of everything you have learned, you are ready to discern them. This repositioning is not about replacing what you lost. It is about preparing you for what is coming. It is about ensuring that your next chapter is not shaped by old wounds, but by renewed strength. It is about aligning your heart with God's plan, even when the path feels unfamiliar. And as this alignment deepens, something powerful becomes clear. The truth you were shown through pain was never meant to end you. It was meant to lead you into the future God has been orchestrating all along. As this journey of revelation, release, healing, and clarity reaches its deeper layers, something profound begins to settle inside you. The understanding that everything you walked through was shaping you for a life built on truth instead of illusion, purpose instead of fear, alignment instead of emotional survival. The pain that once felt like a breaking point now becomes a reference point, a marker of the moment God stepped into your story to redirect your heart toward the path He intended all along. You begin to sense that you are not just healing from what hurt you. You are rising into who you were always meant to become. Your spirit feels grounded in a new way, not because everything around you is perfect, but because everything within you is becoming steady. The confusion that once clouded your thoughts is fading. The emotional dependence that once held you captive is loosening. The longing for what was never meant for you is dissolving. You now see that God allowed the pain not to punish you, but to reveal what your heart could not recognize on its own. Through this process, you have gained discernment, emotional strength, spiritual clarity, and a deeper awareness of your worth. And now, standing in this place of awakening, you begin to understand that the truth you discovered was the key to unlocking the next chapter of your life. A chapter where you choose differently, where you love from a healed place, not a hurting one. Where you walk with confidence instead of fear, intention instead of confusion, purpose instead of desperation. God is not simply restoring what was lost. He is preparing something more aligned, more stable, more genuine than anything you tried to hold on to before. There is a quiet anticipation in your spirit, a sense that something sacred is being aligned on your behalf. This closing realization is not the end of your healing. It is the doorway into what comes next. You are stepping into relationships that honor your spirit, into decisions shaped by clarity, into a future built on truth, rather than illusion. And even though you may not see the full picture yet, you can feel it. God has been guiding each step, even the painful ones, so you could finally walk in the direction meant for your growth, your peace, and your purpose. And as we reach this moment together, I want to leave you with something gentle and sincere. If this message spoke to your heart, if you felt seen or understood in any part of this journey, consider subscribing so you can continue receiving content that supports your spiritual growth. Leave a comment saying something like, "This message was for me, so I know you stayed with me until the end and felt connected to the truth shared here." And if this video strengthened you in any way, a simple like helps reinforce the value of these reflections. There is another video right here that deepens this topic and can guide you even further, so click and continue walking with me as this journey unfolds in your life.